During a crowded family dinner, Dad laughed. "You could learn a lot from your sister. She pays her own way." The table erupted in applause while I sat frozen, my stomach twisting in humiliation. Everyone's eyes were on me, waiting for a response I didn't have. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Nora. I always tried to please my family, but it seemed like no matter what I did, it was never enough. Tess, my younger sister, somehow managed to charm everyone effortlessly. She paid her own bills, she dressed better, she smiled brighter. And Dad couldn't stop praising her. That night, his words felt like a knife in my chest. Growing up, I watched Tess twist simple situations to make herself look better. She had a way of making Mom and Dad believe she was the responsible one, while I was the dreamer who wasted time. I had worked 2 jobs through college, stayed late at internships, and even helped Mom and Dad with their finances quietly, but none of it mattered. Tess got all the credit, all the attention. That dinner was just the latest humiliation, and I had had enough. I decided I wouldn't let her keep winning. I began planning carefully, quietly building my own path. I applied for a scholarship at a prestigious local school and picked up freelance work on the side. Every paycheck went into a secret account. Every achievement was hidden. I wanted this victory to be mine, not something they could take from me. Months later, an opportunity came. Tess boasted at another family gathering about a job she supposedly landed, expecting applause. I stayed silent, letting her glow in the spotlight. Then, at the perfect moment, I revealed my scholarship and freelance success. The table went quiet. Dad's eyes widened. Mom's hand froze over her fork. Tess' smile faltered. It didn't stop there. As I continued to excel quietly, the family started noticing the truth. Tess' manipulations became obvious. The lies she had spread to make me look careless, the small sabotages she had orchestrated. Slowly, the roles reversed. People began respecting me for my hard work, my patience, and my achievements. Tess, once untouchable, could no longer hide behind charm. By the time I fully revealed myself, I wasn't seeking revenge and anger anymore. I just wanted recognition, the acknowledgement I had been denied for so long. Tess had tried to undermine me, but all she did was push me to become stronger. That night at dinner, when Dad laughed at me, I had no idea that one day, I would sit at the same table, calm and confident, while everyone finally saw my worth. The real victory wasn't just embarrassing Tess. It was proving to myself that I could rise above betrayal, that patience and hard work could silence even the loudest critics. After that dinner, I couldn't stop thinking about how unfair my life had always felt. It wasn't just that night. It was years of watching my parents heap praise on Tess while ignoring everything I did. Every award I earned, every late night I spent studying or working, seemed invisible compared to her effortless charm. She didn't just earn attention, she demanded it, and somehow my parents happily gave in. Tess loved showing off. She would casually mention how she paid for her car, her clothes, even little luxuries that I couldn't afford. She made it sound like surviving on her own was the ultimate proof of superiority, and Dad nodded along. Mom smiled proudly. Meanwhile, I stayed in the background, quietly doing my part, hoping someone would notice, but recognition never came. My successes felt hollow when the people I wanted most to see them didn't even glance my way. I often wondered if my parents even realized how much I sacrificed. I skipped weekends with friends to help Mom with errands, spent nights taking extra shifts to ease Dad's financial worries, and still, my efforts were shrugged off. Tess never lifted a finger, yet she was the responsible. The resentment simmered inside me, bitter but quiet. I didn't want to cause drama, I just wanted fairness. Despite feeling trapped, a small spark of determination grew within me. I dreamed of proving that I could succeed on my own terms, not for applause or approval, but to show that my value wasn't measured by comparisons. Every time I thought about Tess' smirks and Dad's approving nods, I imagined a moment where I could quietly shine without them noticing until it was impossible to ignore. It was exhausting, feeling like no matter how much I did, it would never matter. My efforts felt meaningless, my voice unheard. I began keeping a private list of goals, small victories that Tess couldn't diminish because they existed only for me. I saved money secretly, researched scholarships and career paths, and practiced skills I knew would one day set me apart. In the silence of my room, I felt free, even if just for a little while. The unfairness hurt, yes, but it also fueled a fire inside me. I realized that being overlooked didn't mean I was weak. It meant I had been underestimated. And underestimated people have the power to surprise the world. I decided I wouldn't rely on my family's approval. I would prove my worth quietly, methodically, and when the time came, it would speak louder than any praise Tess could ever gather. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of purpose. I was still unseen, still unheard, still underappreciated, but that no longer meant powerless. Every small act of independence I claimed for myself felt like a step toward freedom. The betrayal I felt from my parents' favoritism wasn't just painful, it was my motivation. And I would make sure one day, no one could ignore me again. A few weeks later, we gathered for a small family party at Dad's office. I had hoped it would be just a casual evening, but as soon as we arrived, it became painfully clear that nothing had changed. Dad leaned back in his chair, smiling at Tess, and said, "Nora, you could take a page from your sister's book. Look at how responsible she is." Everyone nodded, laughed politely, and I felt a wave of humiliation wash over me. I tried to brush it off, but while chatting near the kitchen, I caught Tess speaking in hushed tones to our cousin. Her voice was soft, but the words cut deep. "Honestly, Nora tries so hard, but she just can't get it right. I don't know why they even expect her to keep up." She laughed lightly, as if sharing a secret joke. My heart sank. For a moment, I wanted to confront her, to demand why she would say such cruel things. But then it hit me. Tess wasn't just careless with her words. She had been intentionally shaping everyone's perception of me for years, making sure my efforts looked trivial compared to her. She disguised jealousy as concern, charm as competence, and manipulation as guidance. Every compliment I missed, every praise she received, had been carefully engineered. I felt a mix of heartbreak and anger that was almost physical. The realization stung far worse than Dad's earlier comment. Tess wasn't just lucky or naturally favored. She had worked behind the scenes to maintain her position as the perfect child. She had been turning my achievements into weaknesses without anyone noticing. The betrayal was deep because I had trusted her, believed we were sisters in the truest sense. But along with the hurt came a flicker of determination. This wasn't something I could let slide anymore. I couldn't control my parents' blind admiration, but I could control my own actions. I didn't need to compete for their approval. I could build my own reputation, one that Tess could not tarnish. The seed of a plan began to take root in my mind, quiet but fierce. I would rise quietly, deliberately, until no one could deny my worth. Not Tess, not Dad, not anyone. That night, I stayed late in my room, replaying every conversation, every sly comment Tess had made. Every small instance of her undermining me crystallized into a clear picture. She had always seen me as a rival, not a sister. And that revelation shifted something inside me. I felt the weight of betrayal, but I also felt the thrill of empowerment. I realized that heartbreak could fuel action, anger could sharpen focus, and determination could become unstoppable. Tess had underestimated me, as she always did, and that would be her greatest mistake. I would not let her continue to cast shadows over my life. I would step out of the background and make sure my achievements spoke louder than any sly remark she ever whispered. By the time I finally went to sleep that night, my mind was no longer clouded with sadness. It burned with resolve. This was my turning point, the moment I decided that Tess' jealousy would no longer define me. After that night, I made a decision I had been too timid to make before. I would no longer let Tess dominate the narrative of my life. I wouldn't wait for my family to notice me, I wouldn't seek their approval, and I certainly wouldn't allow her to continue looking like the only capable one. This time, I would take control. I began quietly laying the foundation for my independence. First, I researched a highly competitive scholarship I had always dreamed of but never pursued, fearing I wouldn't be taken seriously. I spent late nights perfecting my application, refining essays, and collecting recommendations without telling anyone. The thrill of secretly building something for myself, away from the prying eyes and biased opinions, ignited a fire I hadn't felt in years. Alongside that, I picked up freelance work I could manage from home. Small projects at first, but each one gave me a sense of accomplishment. Every dollar I earned felt like a piece of freedom I had never been granted. I opened a separate savings account, one Tess would never know about, one my parents couldn't touch. It became my private world, a place where my efforts could matter without interference or comparison. I deliberately kept my progress hidden. I didn't post about it, I didn't hint at it, and I certainly didn't discuss it at the dinner table or with my family. Their underestimation of me worked to my advantage. Tess continued flaunting her achievements, her smug smiles filling the room, unaware that I was quietly constructing a life that could outshine hers in every meaningful way. The more she tried to dominate attention, the more determined I became to outlast her. As weeks passed, I noticed a shift in myself. For the first time, I felt a quiet confidence, not the desperate hope for recognition or validation. I no longer cared about being compared. I focused on building something lasting and undeniable. I felt empowered knowing that my work, my successes, and my growth were entirely my own. No one could take them from me, not even Tess. This silent drive became my strength. I no longer measured my worth by how loudly my parents applauded or how favorably Tess presented herself. I measured it by my own effort, my resilience, and my ability to endure. Every time I completed a freelance project, every time I made progress on my scholarship application, I felt a sense of quiet victory that no one could diminish. By keeping my ambitions secret, I turned what had once been hurt and resentment into fuel. I was no longer the overlooked child, the one constantly compared and belittled. I was building a future that was mine alone, a future that would eventually speak for itself. Tess could continue her performances, but the foundation I was laying now was stronger than any charm or manipulation she could muster. For the first time, I felt truly unstoppable. The betrayal, the favoritism, and the years of being dismissed were no longer chains holding me back. They were the engine driving me forward. And when the moment came, I would reveal my achievements, not in anger or spite, but in quiet triumph that no one, not even Tess, could ignore. It was another family gathering, one of those evenings where Tess could hardly wait to take center stage. She leaned back in her chair, a confident smile on her face, and casually announced to everyone, "I just got a job offer at Hawthorne and Company. It's a great step forward, and I think you'll all be proud of me." The table erupted in applause, and my parents beamed, nodding and exchanging proud glances. I felt that familiar sting, a mixture of irritation and the quiet determination I had been nurturing for months. I had been patient, waiting for the right moment. While Tess sought instant validation, I had been quietly constructing something far more significant. I had just received news of a full scholarship to a prestigious program that I had applied to secretly, one that would open doors to opportunities far beyond anything Tess could imagine. I had also lined up a professional internship in a company known for shaping the careers of future leaders. All of it had been kept entirely under wraps. As Tess basked in attention, I chose my moment carefully. The room was filled with chatter and laughter, and my parents were distracted by Tess' self-congratulatory story. I took a deep breath and spoke up, calm but deliberate. "I'm happy for Tess," I said softly, drawing a glance from Dad. "But I just found out today that I was awarded the Hawthorne Fellowship. It comes with a full scholarship and a professional placement starting this summer." The room went silent. Forks paused midair, eyes widened, and for the first time that evening, I felt the weight of attention shift entirely onto me. Dad's jaw tightened, Mom's hand froze, and Tess' confident smile faltered as confusion and disbelief flickered across her face. I held their gaze, quietly savoring the subtle reversal. No one clapped immediately. Instead, they stared, processing what they had just heard. I could feel the unspoken realization settling in, that perhaps they had misjudged me, underestimated my determination and capability. Tess, who had always assumed herself untouchable, looked stunned, unable to find words to counter the news. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation, no shouting or accusations. That was the beauty of it. My revenge didn't rely on embarrassment or humiliation. It was the quiet satisfaction of proving my worth when it mattered most. I had built something far more meaningful than fleeting praise, and in revealing it at the perfect moment, I had rewritten the narrative they had so long believed. For the first time in years, I sensed a shift in their perception. Dad's expression softened, tinged with respect, though he didn't say much. Mom's eyes betrayed a mix of pride and guilt. Tess remained silent, her earlier arrogance replaced by a sudden awareness of her own miscalculations. I leaned back calm, knowing this was only the beginning. The first strike had landed, subtle yet undeniable. I didn't need to boast or argue. My accomplishments had done the talking. And as I looked around the table, I felt the quiet thrill of validation, the knowledge that my patience and effort had finally begun to pay off. That night, I realized that victory didn't have to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes, the most satisfying revenge is simply letting your success speak for itself. It was the night of the annual family banquet, an event where appearances mattered more than anything else. The room shimmered with crystal glasses and polished silverware, and every face seemed to carry the weight of expectation. Tess, of course, was in her element. She glided through the crowd, exchanging smiles and tiny boasts, making sure everyone noticed her elegance and charm. I stayed quiet, letting her soak in the attention, knowing my moment would come at precisely the right time. No one could have guessed how much I had accomplished since our last gathering. I had secured a long-term internship, established multiple freelance clients, and quietly amassed a substantial savings account that I had built entirely on my own. Tonight, I had planned to reveal my independence, not with fanfare or arrogance, but with the quiet confidence that only hard work and patience can produce. As dessert was being served, I stood and addressed the room with calm authority. "I want to share something with all of you," I began, my voice steady. "Since the last time we met, I've taken on a professional internship, completed several freelance projects, and been able to save enough to support myself entirely. Everything I've achieved has been on my own, without help or praise along the way." The room fell into stunned silence. I could see Dad's posture stiffen, his eyes widening as he took in the scope of my achievements. Tess froze mid-smile, her hand hovering over her glass, suddenly unsure of how to respond. My words were simple, matter-of-fact, yet their impact was profound. For the first time, my accomplishments could not be ignored or overshadowed. Tess attempted to interrupt, offering a quick remark about a minor success of her own, but I remained composed. I let her words slide, my expression calm, my posture poised. The subtlety of my reveal made it impossible for anyone to dismiss me or my efforts. Every eye in the room now recognized that I was no longer the overlooked sibling, the quiet one behind the scenes. I had become the undeniable presence, the one whose diligence and intelligence spoke louder than charm or favoritism ever could. Dad cleared his throat and, with a rare note of seriousness, said, "Nora, I didn't realize how much you had accomplished. This is impressive." The acknowledgement, public and sincere, was everything I had hoped for. It wasn't about shaming Tess or making her look small. It was about finally being seen for the hard work and determination I had poured into my life. A quiet wave of satisfaction washed over me. The years of being underestimated, dismissed, and compared to Tess culminated in this single, validating moment. I didn't need applause, although a few hesitant claps trickled through the room. My success, my independence, and my persistence had spoken for themselves. For the first time in my family's eyes, I wasn't just Nora, the overlooked child. I was Nora, the capable, self-reliant woman who had quietly built her own life. And finally, no one could ignore it. In the weeks following my big reveal, subtle cracks in Tess' carefully curated image began to show. It started with small things, whispers from distant relatives, offhand remarks about her exaggerated claims, and questions about inconsistencies in her stories. She had always been skilled at presenting herself as flawless, but her efforts to undermine me had left a trail, and slowly, the truth was coming to light. I watched quietly as family members began to notice patterns they had previously ignored. Cousins who had overheard Tess' earlier comments started sharing what they remembered. Friends she had casually boasted to revealed moments where she had twisted the truth. Even Dad, who had often turned a blind eye, began asking questions that Tess could no longer evade. Her poised demeanor began to falter under the weight of scrutiny, and the confidence she had relied upon so heavily started to crumble. The revelations weren't loud or dramatic. They were small, undeniable details that painted a clear picture. Tess had deliberately belittled my accomplishments, spread doubts about my character, and created a narrative in which she remained untouchable. One by one, the people I cared about began to see through her facade. Tess' attempts to charm and manipulate were now transparent, and the same family who had applauded her cleverness now questioned her integrity. Meanwhile, I remained composed, letting the truth speak for itself. I didn't need to highlight her flaws or gloat. My accomplishments and consistent actions over the past months were enough to demonstrate my competence. What felt most satisfying was watching the slow shift in perception. Conversations that once celebrated Tess' independence now recognized the effort and intelligence I had quietly invested in my own. People approached me with respect, asking for advice, acknowledging my dedication, and celebrating my achievement. Tess tried to regain control, offering explanations and justifications, but they fell flat. The charm that had once carried her was powerless against the growing awareness of her manipulations. She stumbled over words, fumbled in explanations, and could no longer present herself as the unchallenged favorite. Even Dad, who had once mocked me, now treated her statements with skepticism. Every attempt she made to reestablish her image only exposed her duplicity further. In those moments, I felt a profound sense of vindication. The years of feeling overlooked, the humiliation at family gathering, and the quiet frustration of being underestimated all culminated in this moment of clarity. Tess' jealousy and sabotage were no longer secrets, and her attempts to diminish me had entirely backfired. For the first time, the family recognized me fully, not as the overshadowed sibling, but as someone intelligent, patient, and relentless in pursuit of her goals. The betrayal I had endured was finally acknowledged, and the balance of power had shifted. My revenge wasn't loud or vindictive. It was quiet, steady, and complete. Tess' downfall was not just a personal triumph. It was proof that truth and perseverance could outlast manipulation and deceit. I had waited patiently, worked diligently, and when the time was right, the exposure was undeniable. The satisfaction I felt wasn't fleeting. It was the full realization that all the years of being underestimated, ignored, and compared had finally led to a complete and undeniable victory. After Tess' manipulations were exposed and her credibility faltered, I realized it was time to think about the future, not just the past. The anger and humiliation that had driven me for so long had achieved their purpose, but holding on to them would only weigh me down. I decided to forgive, not because everything she did was acceptable, but because I wanted to reclaim my own peace. This forgiveness came with boundaries. I made it clear to my parents and Tess that my independence and decisions were mine alone. I would participate in family events, but I would not allow favoritism, comparisons, or unsolicited advice to dictate my choices. I stopped explaining myself unnecessarily, no longer seeking validation from the people who had once overlooked my efforts. My respect had to be earned, and I would not compromise it again. Tess struggled with this shift. For the first time, she couldn't rely on charm or manipulation to influence those around her. She had to confront the consequences of her actions, the jealousy that had guided her decisions, and the ways she had tried to diminish me. She asked questions, sought explanations, and attempted to rebuild her image, but I remained calm and composed. I didn't need to correct her publicly or shame her. My presence, confidence, and clear boundaries were enough to show her the difference between recklessness and deliberate effort. Family gatherings became different after that. Conversations were no longer dominated by competition or comparison. I engaged when I wanted, spoke when I had something meaningful to share, and remained silent when attention-seeking behaviors arose. The air felt lighter, and I realized how much energy I had wasted trying to fit into roles that weren't mine. I finally felt free to exist without constantly defending my worth. Empowerment came from within, not from external recognition. I had learned to assert myself without aggression, to maintain composure even when others tried to provoke me, and to prioritize my own growth over superficial approval. Tess' downfall had taught me that revenge can be subtle, but rebuilding self-respect requires conscious effort, patience, and balance. I also discovered that forgiving didn't mean forgetting. I remembered every slight, every dismissal, and every undermining comment, not to punish, but to remind myself why I would never compromise my independence again. Forgiveness became a tool for strength, not weakness. I could interact with my family without resentment, but I would not surrender my autonomy or dignity. For the first time, I felt a true sense of balance. I had achieved personal victories, seen the consequences of manipulation, and yet I could extend maturity without sacrificing pride. My self-worth was no longer tied to parental approval or sibling rivalry. It was anchored in my own choices, my own accomplishments, and my own moral clarity. I realized that life wasn't about proving superiority to others anymore. It was about being fully accountable for myself, choosing which battles to fight, and knowing when to rise above. That understanding gave me a quiet strength, a peace I had never felt before, and a profound sense of empowerment that no one could take away. Sitting alone in my room one evening, I found myself reflecting on the years I had spent feeling invisible, belittled, and constantly compared to Tess. Every dinner, every family gathering, every casual remark from my parents that made me feel small played through my mind like a relentless loop. The humiliation had been sharp, the betrayal deep, and the frustration nearly unbearable. Yet, looking back now, I saw that each moment of pain had also been shaping me, teaching me lessons that no praise or recognition ever could. I thought about the quiet nights spent working on my scholarship applications, the hours devoted to freelance projects, and the careful planning that allowed me to grow without interference. Those efforts had been lonely at times, and the temptation to give up had been strong. But each small achievement, though unseen by my family at the time, was building a foundation I could stand on proudly today. My true victory had never been about outshining Tess in front of them. It had been about proving to myself that I was capable, resilient, and determined. It was strange to realize that validation from others, even from my parents, had been secondary all along. The empowerment I felt now came from knowing that I could navigate life on my own terms. I didn't need constant recognition to understand my worth. I had learned to measure success by effort, growth, and integrity, not by applause or comparisons. Every subtle triumph, every careful decision made in secrecy, had contributed to a life I could finally claim as entirely my own. At the same time, the memories of betrayal and the sting of favoritism remained, but they no longer weighed me down. Instead, they served as reminders of how far I had come. Tess' attempts to manipulate, my parents' blind favoritism, and all the subtle undermining I had endured had tested my patience, sharpened my focus, and strengthened my resolve. The hardships I faced had not broken me, they had refined me. I also understood that quiet revenge, built on persistence and strategy rather than anger, could be more powerful than any dramatic confrontation. By letting my actions speak, I had reclaimed my dignity and reshaped the family dynamics without resorting to hostility. It was a victory that was both silent and undeniable, the kind that left no room for doubt or resentment to linger. Looking forward, I felt a balance I had never known. Independence no longer felt like a struggle or a battle. It was simply who I was. Confidence and self-respect replaced insecurity and doubt. My life had been quietly transformed through resilience, patience, and determination. The bittersweet truth was clear. I had endured humiliation, betrayal, and isolation, yet emerged stronger, wiser, and unapologetically myself. That realization brought a peace that no past comparison, criticism, or favoritism could ever take away. My journey had been long, but it had led to something far more valuable than recognition. It had led to a life I could finally claim as my own. Do you think I did the right thing by standing my ground and proving myself? Or should I have tried to forgive sooner? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe and hit the bell for more stories like this.